Yeah, thanks for introducing us. I just wanted to jump in at the beginning to give a little background on what led us to some of the results that we have today and where this project came from, and just say hi to everyone. It's nice to see a few names in the audience that we recognize. Jane, of course, McMillan has been the co-PI on these projects with me. See Renee's in there and a few others. So anyway, nice to see everyone. And it's been awesome working with Dave over the past number of years in various capacities. And we were talking yesterday about how long we've known each other, which is pretty cool. So anyway, my name is Matt Neumer. I'm a professor in health promotion here at Dalhousie, and as Cillian said, director of the SHaG Lab. I don't own it, thank goodness, but it's here. It's really just a space for us to work in. So yeah, the title on the poster is a little bit different from what we'll be talking about today. We're going to give an overview of our project, really from its inception to where we are today and where we hope to head with it, with a focus on Indigenous boys and men's health and well-being. And we frame it really around holistic sexual health. So yeah, excellent. So this is what we'll go over today, the various phases of our project, phase 1, phase 2, what we did along the way, and yeah, what we hope to do. So in phase 1, this started way back when Jane invited me to a meeting at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center to talk about designing a program around research around the 7 Sparks program. So I sat around, we listened, we wrote some grants, and eventually we got a CVR Catalyst grant within, at the time it was called the HIV Community-Based Research Call. It's currently STBBIs and so on. And anyway, out of that, those discussions and a lot of roundtable work, we came up with a project to do community-based interventions around Indigenous boys' holistic sexual health in Atlantic Canada. Yeah. So started really well before 2017 in terms of its conception, but that's when we first received funding. And then you can see we did our pilot project in the first couple years, and then we went on to phase 2, which I'll talk about in a second. Is there any more on this, or should I go to the next one? Yeah. So what we recognized whenever we were looking at this, that we weren't going to be able to do research in a realistic way that could impact folks in terms of sexual health, by looking at on the ground issues like, using condoms or needle exchange, whatever it was. What we really wanted to do was pull back and say, if we're going to address, boys and men's health in Atlantic Canada, and we're going to think about sexual health in a holistic way, we really have to think about the bigger issues of colonization, institutionalization, racism, discrimination, and so on. And from that starting position, we were thinking bigger than just small intervention type of stuff. And that was really inspired by the Friendship Center, and then subsequently Healing Our Nations. And then Cillian actually came up with this diagram over here, the original version. I don't know if you've been on it lately, but he was looking at this idea of masculinity, sexual health, and how could we think about it through an Indigenous lens, and all of the different factors that could come into it. And it's an evolving piece. Right now, this is where it stands, thinking about wellness, justice, pleasure, all through this lens of indigeneity, and then within a health, masculinities, and sexualities framework. So the first thing we did was we wanted to understand what we already knew about the literature on boys and men's sexual health. So we did a rapid review. These were studies that were specific to Canada. We saw 13 qualitative studies emerge, really showed us things we thought were true. This overarching intersection between social conditions and individual health outcomes, a gap in the literature we certainly identified, especially in Atlantic Canada, and then some suggestions about how we might go about this. Thinking about the way we treat knowledge, the way we look at intergenerational relationships, and so on. So it really guided our work from the very outset. So then we did a graphic. We went to, what was its name of it then?
The Atlantic Health,
First Nations Health Conference.
Atlantic Policy Congress, First Nations Health Conference.
Yeah, the name has changed a couple times over the years, but anyway, we did a community consultation where Dave led it, did a graphic facilitation. We had, I mean, it was really, really interesting to hear the folks that were there, because it was everyone from on the ground health directors, the chiefs, to, you know, men that were from the communities, all having a say in what are the things that we needed to think about in terms of moving forward. And out of that, we had the following graphic facilitation, which I'll let you look at for a second before I speak, because everyone just looks at it anyway. Hopefully it's clear enough that you can see it well. But we heard a lot of the issues, some of the issues that we were thinking about, but then we saw a whole lot more emerge, and was really pressing on this idea that, you know, what does it mean to be a man in our communities? What does it mean to be, you know, having healthy relationships? What are the pathways that various men are on within these communities? So that's sort of where it all got started there. That's on our website as well, so folks can take a look at it there, and we also published that piece. So moving right along through these consultations and our rapid review of the literature, we then did some stakeholder interviews with folks, and we also did 10 interviews with guys that were participating in the 7 Sparks program at the Friendship Center. And for those that aren't familiar, the program is designed to help guys transition from incarceration back into the community and offer supports through cultural activities, among other things. And that's where we really came in, trying to support in the future some of the cultural activities that would benefit the guys. Yeah. So it's just the long history, so kind of moving through it quickly. Then we consulted. We did both of those projects. We developed a community report, and then we went back to both the Friendship Center and Healing Our Nation, and we were like, what do you want to do? So we now know what we know part of what the issues are that are facing boys and men in Atlantic Canada. And without question, right away, Healing Our Nation said, we want to do major gatherings, one in New Brunswick, one in Nova Scotia. Want to give the names?
Yeah, so we found what we were hearing was that Mi'kmaq sort of dominate a lot of programming in the Atlantic, so we wanted to make sure that we were up into Wolastoqey territory to offer that, because it's a cultural gathering, and we were making certain ceremonies available for people to take part in if they like, and different activities. We only felt that it would be fair that they weren't expected to take part in Mi'kmaq culture. So that's why the 2 sites came about.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I forgot to say is the other piece of it was that at the Friendship Center, we would do, you know, cultural or ceremonial activities for the rural guys that were in the program. And I meant to mention at the beginning, I just want to acknowledge Scott Lakis, who's since passed, who is the director of the 7 Sparks program, did a lot of other stuff, but really was the original idea behind a lot of this stuff in partnership with Jane. And we just want to honor his legacy with some of the work that we're doing today. So I just want to make that acknowledgement. What do we have next?
So this is just the timeline again, just to refresh your memory. So we're past the drum making workshop that you guys did with Seven Sparks, and then we're moving right into our major gathering. And these gatherings for me were exciting. We've been planning gatherings for a lot of years, but as a small organization, we didn't have a lot of funding, so we couldn't bring a lot of people in. And we know the benefits from holding the gatherings by making these things available to people. And so with partnering up with the SHaG Lab, we had a little bit more money. So our first gathering we held in 2022, and then the second gathering was in 2020, sorry, 2023 and 24. 20,
Yeah,
yes,
we did it this year.
that's
Yeah.
right. Sorry.
It's been a while and a lot of
It's been a
things
while.
along the way. What I wanted to kind of emphasize at the beginning of this, and I'll turn it over to Dave from here, was that we really wanted to ensure that it was the activities, the ideas, and the interventions that came from the community organizations and the community itself. And we really took a back seat and said, tell us what you want to do, and we'll figure out the research behind it and how to make that work, both in partnership with the organizations, but also ultimately later on with the participants themselves, with the elders, with the teachers, say, where and how would you like this to take place, if at all? Because as I said, number one is that we prioritize the thing that's happening, whether it's a ceremony, whether it's an activity, that the boys and men that are engaged in these things, their safety, well-being, healing, participation, all of those things were paramount, were first. And we do want to translate this stuff out, but we're trying to be very protective of the folks that were involved in the research. So anyway, so from there.
And Dal did a really good job at that right from the beginning, and letting things sort of happen organically and move along. There was never really any feel of that you were part of a research project, and we had a lot of protocols in place that would only allow the collection of data at certain times or certain activities. And another big point on that also was we wanted to make sure that people had enough time to process all of this. So in the beginning, we had participants that said, wow, we have all this free time. And we purposely made sure that they had extra time to really process. So the methods phase 2, the SHaG Lab and the partner organizations wanted to find ways to support sexual well-being of masculine aligned people in Indigenous communities. So the outcome of this community consultation was to hold a series of workshops or multi-day gatherings. The first gathering that we held the year before last was 3 days. Participants said they would like to have a little bit longer, a little bit more time. They felt like they were just getting comfortable by the third day, and then they were going home. So the second gathering, we went with 5 days, and that went quite well. But some of the cultural activities and land-based teachings that we did were the medicine walks. The participants always get so much out of that. The drum making workshops, the sweat lodge is another one that they really love to take part in. Lots of sharing circles, lots around traditional values and skills, preparing traditional foods. And so these events, between the drum making and the two major gatherings between 2020 and 2023. And their participants range from 15 and up for a total of 20 participants altogether. I should say too, we just made these activities and ceremonies available. They weren't required to take They could take part in as much or as little as they like. It wasn't forced on anybody, but we found the majority of people took part in everything.
Can we just pause for a second? I know we have time for questions at the end, but if anybody, and now that we've sort of gone over the methods, the formative stuff, does anybody have any questions at this point?
No,
Going once.
we're doing a good job then.
All right. Well, we'll carry on then.
Prior to the data collection, SHaG Lab received ethics clearance from both Dalhousie Research and the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch. The really great thing about it was that the research attended and participated in the activities, and I think they got quite a bit out of taking part in some of the cultural activities and just being able to sit around and spend time with participants and be able to conduct the one-on-one interviews. You know, if they had extra time. We did some art-based data collection activities, including audio recorded graphic facilitation sessions. We really now are sort of making sure that we're including that graphic facilitation piece in each step forward because I just think it's great. The data collected, well, so that was the other thing we wanted to make sure people understood was that the data collected belongs to the communities and they're free to use it any way that they please. The research team here at SHaG Lab is available to help interpret the data if need be and probably help in the dissemination process also. All of the interviews were then analyzed, transcribed and analyzed. So, should use a bigger font. So, emotional and relational literacy, connecting with other men and culture was linked to greater emotional and relational literacy. And so this is one of the quotes from one of the participants. I'm pretty close with a lot of those people, you know, they helped me out in the past with a lot of the struggles that I've had. And so it's just some good energy that is in that sweat lodge. Even when we're talking about negative things in our lives, we're still able to find the positive inside of that sweat lodge, and we're able to walk out feeling great. I've never walked out of a sweat lodge and felt bad before. And that whole experience to the building of the sweat lodge from the ground up is really nice, is really great to see. You know, how each ribbon tied and each piece builds the whole lodge. And so there's a lot of teachings in there for the participants too. This picture right there to the right of that quote, that's actually Glooscap Caves. Some of you may recognize it, but there you can see Glooscap's face on the left side there. It's a great picture. Okay. So the findings support the need for strong emotional bonds between Indigenous boys and men, and see this as an important piece in creating good relationality. In addition, we also recognize that for some Indigenous people, including Two-Spirit, I'm just going to move this. Julian's head's in the way. There was a connection to community and one's own community traditions regarding gender and sexuality is important in identity construction and acceptance. Any questions emerging there yet? No.
No, and I've none in the chat so far.
Okay. my eyesight is terrible. I've never noticed that. That's awful. So emotional and relational literacy, some findings here. These are a couple more quotes. I'll let you read through those, the first quote there. But I would like to read through the second one. It says, I think a lot of people associate the word safe with just physical safety, but emotional safety is really big, especially for like the dude bro that you mentioned, that has a reputation, an ego to uphold, and any actions that they take that can damage their emotional safety. Whether or not that they would use that word safety to identify that, I think it encapsulates feelings, the experience, well. This picture right here, this was from the first gathering at Glooscap Ridge. They were just getting ready to make fry bread there. And that was a really great activity also, just showed people coming together and helping each other. So the findings support the need to dispel siloed sexual health. Is it Western sexual health paradigm? I cannot see paradigm. That's terrible. I guess I could get up and move closer. Or make them bigger. In our case, emotional well-being and positive masculinity were important for improving relations among Indigenous boys and men, which in turn uplifts and promotes the health of the entire community. So this type of benefit can combat homophobia, biphobia, heterosexism, and racism, which result from colonial imposition and contour the health and well-being of Indigenous people.
Stop. Hold on. So it also said that our findings support the need for strong emotional bonds between Indigenous boys and men, and see this as an important piece of good relationality, including Indigenous people or two-spirit people, connection to community, and one's own traditional teachings. And regarding gender and sexuality, and it's important to identify those constructions and acceptance. I think it was pretty neat in those gatherings, because we had diversity in terms of how people express their gender, but we saw a great deal of acceptance and support for each other in that space, which really challenged a lot of the traditional ideas around masculinity, which was nice to see. Oh, you can do that.
Sure.
Since I can see it online.
Engaging with material culture like drum making generated feelings of pride and self-efficacy. And here's another quote right here. It's the first time for me that I've ever made a drum. Sure, I'm Native, but I never did anything like that. It's the first time. I'm really proud of myself. I've still got the drum at home, and I look at it and I'm like, I'm right amazed I did that. It's really surprising.
So I think if you're reading this quote, you'll see that it's after the gathering happens. One of the things that we did was follow-up interviews, and Sulian was actually really instrumental in this piece, was that after the gatherings, we wanted to know not only what happens on the day or on the days that they were there, but what were the lasting impacts? What were they thinking about a few months later? And that was to try to give us insight into what sort of programming had long-lasting effects. And I would also comment that we had really great teachers at each of the drum making sessions that we had. So the material culture piece seemed to be really important for folks, that they were both doing it and learning about what each component meant and what each teacher had to say about the parts of the drums, how it was, understood and valued within Indigenous cultures. So this not only was the act of making a drum, but also they later talked about how it improved health outcomes, resolved interpersonal conflict, promotes those feelings of pride, conduit for connecting with culture and community, just general therapeutic benefits. Scholars have posited that many Indigenous communities experience a wounded identity because of extrication from spiritual and cultural traditions. Material culture can work to counteract that by instilling pride, promote self-identity, and restore the practices of passing healthy behaviors down to subsequent generations. The purview of Western health paradigms on Indigenous well-being tends to emphasize personal dysfunction and socioeconomic inequalities rather than considering the overall health and well-being. And by taking this sort of holistic approach and incorporating material culture, we understand that community health acknowledges that these cultural activities lend to mental, communal, physical, and spiritual well-being. Yeah, 4 aspects of health in Indigenous worldviews.
I just want to point out too that that part where the participant says, "I'm Native, but I never did anything like that." It's the first time, and I think there's a misconception that people have, that they think because somebody lives within an Indigenous community that they're traditional and they have access to all of these great ceremonies and traditional activities or cultural activities. However, it's quite the opposite. We find that people living in urban areas have more access to programming, ceremonies, and the cultural activities. So I just wanted to point that out there too. Here's another quote. I realized that whenever something would go wrong or something was a little broken, you just found a way to fix it with what you have. And it makes me more open to the idea that, oh, I can just take some wood and just start carving it, and whatever comes up will be the result. I struggle with the need for perfection or the need for a pristine plan, but I find myself more open to just trying. And so engaging with material culture is connected to improved health outcomes among many Indigenous communities globally.
It's the same as before.
As before. Okay. Oh, it is. Yeah. Very good. So we'll move on. Thanks. Land-based activities produced expressions of gratitude, clarity, and self-acceptance. Another quote here: part of how I see our medicine is, it's connecting to the spirits of the plants, and gathering your own medicine is part of the healing process. I would rather go get it and create that connection and ask the spirit of the plant, oh, I need this for that. Could you help me? And of course, we need access to those medicines that grow out on the land. And if we don't have the land, and if the land is sick, we're sick. So it's a big connection between us and the living things, and for that kind of medicine.
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier on, we were thinking about things that underlie the study, and such as the larger things, colonization, land rights, things of that nature. You know, we saw this is one of the spaces where that was acknowledged and understood and pushed back against some of the impacts of, you know, environmental damage and destroying ancestral lands, and but not just talking about it, by experiencing it, but then also seeing the land, talking to it, and just being there and existing. And that really took it out of sort of like the esoteric space of theory and things, and brought it into real life, and contributed to some of that healing, while acknowledging the history of trauma and damage that has gone on. Studies have also demonstrated that Indigenous health is contingent on positive relations with both kin and the natural landscape, which is then passed on intergenerationally through oral tradition. And we saw that happening. The teachers had been on that land for years, and we're inviting our participants to take part in their specific spaces and cultures, and they knew the walks and they knew the things that they would talk about and help them understand. So this interconnectedness and good relations and Indigenous wellness frameworks are extended to relationships with the land, including the living and non-living environments. In this sense, medicine and healing are holistic and contingent on Indigenous principles such as reciprocity, taking care of the plants and animals and the land in exchange for the benefits, and respecting the agency of living and non-living beings, privileging all aspects of the natural world and not just the exceptionalism of human beings.
So another quote here, and some more great pictures. Most of our way of life are ceremonies when you think about it. So most of our aspects are really connected to this land and to our culture. I mean, of course, it's beneficial. I wish that every Indigenous people would have their ceremonies and all the steps that our culture have. That would be so much healthier.
Yeah. So in our findings, ceremony was a commonly cited method for framing or accessing this type of interconnectedness. Healing can take place when relations between all these aspects of the natural world are balanced. Thus, we can think of sexuality, spirituality, and nature too as not things, but of sets of relations in which power and sometimes material sustenance circulates. That was by Tallbear. Good relations are paramount for many facets of healing, and sexual well-being is inextricably intertwined with these broader issues of relationality. Yeah.
Positive masculinity was described as empathetic and generous towards others. Another quote here. When I think of responsibility and our community of Indigenous men, I see some people being against taking on that responsibility or seeing it as too much of a burden. But I think part of that is from not having emotional or mental needs met because of the way that the Western world treats men and has taught you never show weakness, never show emotion, and you don't cry. And you don't know it's a lifelong lesson to learn that those things are okay. But I think that makes responsibility feel more like an honor to me. And I think of more parts of ourselves, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. And I think it makes it more complete.
It was really interesting to hear these guys thinking and reflecting on those ideas around what it means to be a man, and really a lot of the stuff that we had heard elsewhere and is in the literature without them having ever learned it or whatever, just was starting to really come out in a real way. And it was interesting to hear the guys talk about what we would call hegemonic masculinity and those, influences of colonialism and racism and other things on what it means to be a man, but then recapturing some of that and talking about, showing weakness, crying, and creating that space and seeing it happen. It broke down a lot of the barriers around masculine identity that keeps men apart. And in this space and connecting it with both land and ceremony and culture, started to create a bond which counteracted a lot of that negative influence of, masculinity in its poorer sense. Yeah.
Another quote here. It might just be the Western idea of the masculine role for Indigenous communities is just strength, warriors, always stoic and smoldering. Whereas it's not like that. I think of our sweat today, where it was very open to expressing emotion. It was very open to showing signs of weakness, showing signs of saying, I need help, I need strength, I want forgiveness. I pray for these things that really fine and accepted. And that is something where the masculine communities are even let down.
Yeah, and I think this also speaks to the gender diversity, the diversity in gender expressions among the masculine identifying folks that were there, and as well as the two-spirit folks that were there. There were quite a few that identified as such. And within that space, it created an opportunity for understanding, for everyone to reach into and experience different ways of expressing their gender. And so academically, these structural power inequalities that come from hegemonic masculine ideals were often counteracted. Intersectional identities are impacted by indigeneity, socioeconomics, gender, sexuality, which are all determined by colonialism. But during these things, it's important to understand that gender and sexuality in the colonial context is an institution, one that is a proponent of heteronormative and Christian institutions of marriage, are often opposing Indigenous conceptions of gender and sexuality and well-being. And so these spaces redefined, in a way, Indigenous masculinities and connecting Indigenous conceptions of gender and sexuality, such as two-spiritedness, promoted acceptance and lended to a more positive relational experience.
And this photo here is from the hike down to Glooscap Caves. It's quite a big rock face that you have to go down over, and just everyone sort of came together and made sure that everyone got there safely.
Yeah.
We did have a youth breaker ankle one year.
Not at ours.
Years, but not at ours. So this was the graphic facilitation from the final group discussion of the project. This was after the 5-day retreat. I feel like that's the second one, maybe.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's from the first.
It was.
Yeah. So I'll let that.
This is the first major gathering.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm just looking at the second one now. They're similar.
They're very similar, which just goes to show you that it's good stuff. I'll let you have a look at that for a minute. There's some good things in there. But if you're looking back at the first one too, there's so many similarities and sort of what come up. Next questions?
What's sometimes neat for me is to put this graphic facilitation up against first one that we did when we were asking what the issues were that we're facing Indigenous boys and men. It's not as though there's an answer, but it's at least thinking about a different story on the other side of it, and what were the people that experienced these gatherings saying, and how did they feel, and what did they think about on the other side of this?
It's a great activity to do at the end. Like there's a lot of energy that goes into these.
It's always a slow start, and then
Yeah.
everybody starts building on everything that's said. So that was the first one. You can flip to the second one now.
Right. This is the second gathering. Retreat.
This one we saw a lot more recognition of the impact of water, and something we've been thinking a lot about, because it's also, because the camp that we were at was literally right next to a lake, and a lot of the activities centered around, even the medicine walks were often near water, oceans, lakes, things of that nature. So we've been thinking a lot about the influence of water in our activities. So maybe reconceptualizing not just land-based activities, but land and water-based activities that kind of more reflects what happens out east, so to speak, and so on.
And the conclusion. So, do you want me to go over this?
Sure.
Yeah. So, the constructs of gender and sexuality in colonial societal networks enforce reductive categorization and the dampening of Indigenous relationality. Connection to community and traditions can be imperative to well-being. Recommendations are made for moving forward communities of relations rather than privileging the disaggregation and dissection of gender, sexual health, and sexuality in a colonial societal network. And that the connection to culture and ceremony may support sexual well-being by building capacity to resist colonial violence and align sexual well-being with Indigenous frameworks, which embody respect for oneself and others, nature and diversity. We've been holding these gatherings for 15 years, and I think I've said it more than a few times. The benefits of including culture are endless, I think. And this just sort of solidifies that, what those benefits are.
Just pause there.
Yeah.
So we'll pause there before we do future directions and see if there's any comments, questions.
In the chat, we have some, well, in addition to a lot of appreciation for the graphic design, we have some people asking a little bit more about it. One of the things was, did you have the same graphic facilitator for the 3 sessions?
No, all 3 were different. Yeah, I'm trying to remember who the first one was.
Was a lady, it's on right on, their name is right on it.
Susan McLeod, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
What's the name of the group she was working with? There was a company. Anyway,
That's so long. I'm trying to.
yeah, it was quite a while ago. The last one that we had is a queer artist in Halifax who has done actually quite a few not just this kind of graphic facilitations, but other graphic facilitations with Indigenous folks in Atlantic Canada. I know he's done a bunch of work with the grandmothers in Cape Breton, and so on. So he came to the last one. He was there all week actually. So we were really trying to get the researchers and as many folks that were involved also there and participating in the activities and the ceremonies where we were invited to do so, which was almost everything, which was pretty cool. Yeah. So, yeah, the second one.
It was another, they're all from, she was from it was a rural area.
Yeah. Anyway, great questions. We can't remember exact names. We can get you that after the fact. There's just a lot that goes into those gatherings. So like when we're going to them, we're like, okay, we have the people, the cars, the stuff, the food, you know what I mean? Where's there, space to stay, all those kind of
And
things.
then all the unforeseen.
Yeah. So yeah.
And then I guess the final question on graphic facilitation was wondering how you were using the graphic, like the graphic designs in the project once they were made.
So we're using it as data. So the first one the consultation piece we published, and talked about graphic facilitation as a means of data gathering, but then also as a means of guiding the work, as a way to elicit and give feedback to the participants that are there in real time about what we're hearing, what's being expressed, and then they can have it adjusted, and do all of those things. So moving forward, we're still doing the write-ups of all of the data that we have from number 2. We just, right before this, we had another meeting on one of the papers we're designing. So our plan is to incorporate those into some of the papers as we go along, and then also make them available via our website and otherwise for both the participants and communities that want to look at it, and so on. So I don't know if that's specific enough, but it's kind of, I think we may do its own paper on that, because it's interesting to see, after this week of all of these experiences, what are the things that come out and the commonalities. And we didn't show either of the groups any of the graphic facilitations ahead of time. So I'll be very curious, we'll be curious to see, like, what are the commonalities? There's a lot. And then where are the departures? And,
And I think it just fits nicely too with Indigenous people being, we're graphic learners and we're storytellers, and it just really flows nicely. You can look at the one document and it paints the whole picture of how things went and what we did.
But I like what it means to be a man thread kind of appears through all 3. And I think that will be an important piece, because obviously we're going to tease apart conceptions of gender throughout the study, both from a masculinity framework, but now I'm thinking kind of a little bit beyond that, and thinking about the influence of our Two-Spirit participants and so on. So anyway, stuff that we're still wrestling around with, and we'll have more for you down the road. Put up the graphic facilitations.
That's what I'll do here.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so I'll go over the future direction here, phase 3. And so right now we're working with partner organizations. We're going to be focusing on mobilizing and disseminating knowledge from the current project to stakeholders and community members in Atlantic First Nation communities. We're currently stepping ahead a little bit and forming Indigenous boys and men wellness groups to help identify new supportive tailored programming with Indigenous boys and men in their communities to reflect values and needs voiced in phase 2. So what we learned from phase 2, we have one group here in Halifax and one in northern, a virtual one in northern New Brunswick. And in the future, so with our hopes that we can build on the most recent findings and community input, we hope to continue the project and increase support for IBM experiencing complex challenges to their holistic sexual health. We've established partnerships with 4 communities, 2 Mi'kmaq and 2 Wolastoqey, and we plan to run consultation process with each community to generate consensus about local sexual health needs and how they may be addressed with community-based programming. We will then co-design with our collaborators a set of guiding research principles and partnership agreements for each community. And I think more and more keeps coming out too, that we can, I think that's the great thing about this, it can go so many directions. And so how many years has it been?
Yeah, it's almost a decade.
Almost a decade, yeah.
And I guess our idea really is at the end of this that we've done these one-off gatherings, but we're hoping to build capacity in communities, both rurally and urban, to make it institutionalized, to make it part of the programs and things that are available. So ultimately research ends at some point, though we don't see an end in sight, but at some point, eventually it probably will end. But we want it to go well beyond that and to give, and part of our impetus in the next phase is to give the knowledge and, back and to make sure that it's there for others and just can be available to the communities and so on. I'm not saying that as articulately as I want to, but yeah. Jane's got a hand up there.
Hi, Jane.
I do. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your presentation. It's always so lovely to revisit. I question around engaging people with disabilities. So I've been doing some work with the Wabanaki Council on Disabilities, and sexual health is and just even sexuality is one of those things in disability work that it gets marginalized, and I'm wondering if you've been doing any thought about broadening the inclusivity there.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the hopes of being in communities and being also attached with the next iteration of a men's group at the Friendship Center, is that we're going a little bit outside of the spaces that are normally available to us, right? That it can be more inclusive because it's just there. And well, I think that's a great idea to actively recruit there. I mean, I have done a little bit of work in terms of disabilities and sexualities. The other half of the SHaG Lab, I would say, outside of sort of the Indigenous aspect of it, but certainly we should incorporate that.
I'm really concerned with access, right? Like accessing information, accessing culture. One of the things that's come out of the community work is that the distance from culture for people with Indigenous peoples with disabilities is a violation of rights. And so I think there are some really terrific synergies there, but making sure that boys and men who have disabilities are able to access culture, for example. So New Brunswick's doing great things in terms of its accessible powwows and that sort of work that we can all learn from. But just some of the work that you've done here, I think I would encourage you to reach out to Maui Dunk Society, for example, or continue with the Friendship Center, of course. But I think getting at those people that access issues, access to justice, access to culture, access to language, access to safe sexual resources and health resources, just the resource work, information,
Mm-hmm.
it's a community that's really underserved. Thanks.
No, thank you. I mean, this is why Jane's been just such a great part of this project, because the things that we're not always seeing, you just have such great insight into. So that's going to be on our radar, definitely. Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I have another question. It's not strictly the project content per se, but what makes a good partner on the academic side for different Indigenous organizations? Like if we have a group here, what would you recommend them to get a actual partner in an institution, a university that's going to operate in a good way?
Sorry, which side of that? As the academic
Like,
institution or a community organization?
yeah, what should the community organization look for?
Look for in terms of whether an academic's going to behave well?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I think
Control.
yeah, control, ownership, all of those things. Openness. I think also where an idea comes from, a lot of times, all of this that has happened with us is the ideas aren't mine. I mean, they never were. And I think if you see someone who is just trying to be supportive, that's a really good indicator. It's also a good indicator if the person or group isn't out to gain something. Like I have said a bunch of times, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I just say it this way because it seems to resonate, that I don't have a horse in the race. Like, I'm a full professor. I don't need anything from this. Like, it's not in my interest. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to get somewhere with it. It's very much, what can we do and how can we be supportive? And when you're prioritizing, from my perspective, when we're prioritizing the communities and the participants first, I think that's also a really good sign. Everything we do is secondary. Those are just some of the things that come to the top of my mind. I think, honestly, though, it's about building relationships. That has to be there. I got to know Scott over the years, but I didn't know him right away. But he's a pretty cool guy. Really smart, but also fun to get along with. And then I'd known Dave for a really long time, because I also work in the area of HIV. And just building on those relationships and extending it out beyond just your contact and who you know.
Understanding that.
Yeah. Like, yeah. So, and what would you say?
Well, I would say making sure that it's safe. And I think that's sort of the role that Healing Our Nations played, to make sure that, that culture was preserved and it wasn't abused, and it was respected for what it was. And you'll know when something doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right.
Mhm.
And I think so, just being aware of that, and engaging, like for myself, for a long time, I said, I don't get involved in research that doesn't directly benefit people. I've been involved in a lot of research in the past that have, a lot of vulnerable people have opened up and shared, and I said, I'm not doing this if you're going to pull the plug in a year and not keep continuing to fund things. And then, sure enough, the plug gets pulled. And so in some cases, just making sure that it's safe and that we're not creating more damage by engaging people and having people open up around past trauma.
I'd add one more thing. If the academics on their side are there and willing to be vulnerable and so on, like, I think Dave once asked me what my idea of camping was, and I said something like anything below 3 stars.
Yeah.
So it isn't my first choice to go camping. However,
But it's an experience.
I was there, for most of it. And it was beneficial to me. And, I remember at the beginning of one of the retreats, I try to be as open and transparent as I possibly can with the participants. There's nothing secretive that happens. We ask them where they're comfortable with things, and they're often sitting there quiet, obviously, like wondering, what is this space that I've just dropped into? And I just tell them who I am. I talk about my past, what brought me here. I say that thing about, like, I'm not here to take from you. And then I talk about, some of my own experiences in my life. And it was not funny. It was interesting that right after at the second gathering, right after our first meeting with the participants, after we'd done sort of the informed consent things and whatnot, we were walking back. The way it was set up, you were on one side, and then where the gathering place was for food and activities and things, and then on the other side was our camps. And you would walk past the fire on the way, and one of the guys from there, he was like, "You're going to want to interview me. You'll be really interested to hear my gender journey." And I was like, "Hello." It's like, and I did, like, I don't know if I did it right. I might have done it right then. I might have just grabbed the recorder and I was like, "Tell me your story." And it was that quick, and that was kind of one of, so I will also mention Sulian here, who was one of the great additions to the team for a while. So he got thrown into the fire, so to speak, not the sacred one, maybe, I don't know. At the second gathering, we had shifted it a week, so I could only stay for half. And then shortly after I left, one of the other RAs got sick, and Sulian suddenly went from being there to participate and, be in somewhat of a supportive role, was the lead investigator on the project and on site, and really just ran with it and did a great job, connecting with the guys and doing the interviews. And we stayed in contact and discussed, different things. But by the end of it, he was just doing his thing. He was just a natural. So we were really lucky to have him there. So thank you, and good job.
Trying to think of how many bamboo you cut up during the first gathering, trying to get the whistles for the guys. They were trying to make you were so patient.
Yes, thank you. I guess my final question, which is sort of bounces off what we were starting to allude to, is although this isn't something that we'll say the project explicitly has, maybe, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about sort of where mentorship and co-learning sort of intersected or was woven in the project.
Oh, it was everywhere. I mean, I would say we as the researchers learned more and benefited so much. You know what I mean? Like I hardly spoke there. You know what I mean? Like I pretty much said hello, and then I just hung out. Like I went swimming with them, like hung out on the rock or the dock. There's the word I'm looking for. And just chatted with the guys and things. But I mostly sat as as one of the researchers, sat back and listened to the teachings and listened to the wisdom of the elders. And it was, yeah, go ahead.
A lot of transfer of knowledge. Like every time you turned around, somebody was helping somebody. And even in conversations, we had one fellow that was quite a bit older than the rest of the group, and he said, "I've learned so much from this young fella," and vice versa. So that mentorship is almost, it just happens on its own, and like that comes from the first day. Nobody's talking to anybody.
Mhm.
Nobody's there. They don't know how they're going to get through the 3 days, but then on day 3, 2, 3, they've formed relationships, and they've really taken that space and made it their own and allowed people to come into it and sit with them. So,
and you never fully get rid of power imbalances and things like that, but I kind of think about it as sort of the recorder that's often sitting there when we're interviewing guys or any participants. The interview, the recorder's there, and initially everybody notices it, but over time, as you build trust and you're discussing things, you forget it's there. And similarly, that sort of power issue is there, but over time, as you build trust and you get to know each other, you just kind of, completely forget that it's there, but it mitigates its impact, is what I would say, and allows for a little bit more communal expression, communal existence together.
it just feels right, all of it.
Hmm. Okay, I'm just reviewing the chat. I don't think we have. Oh,
Renee.
I just wanted to say how wonderful the presentation was. I feel like I've kind of been adjacent to this journey over the last decade in some ways, and just it's like hands up, like that. Just like the presentation was brilliant. The way that you've reflected and talked about the work that you're doing, it's so exciting. There's so little attention to men's health, certainly in our universe, and or at least in my experience, which is limited to my experience. But I think like this, like you're holding up to see this coming out of Mi'kma'ki and out of holistic way knowledge and wisdom and experience, and the way that you've responded and adjusted and made space. I'm so, it's just such a wonderful way to spend the lunch hour. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're really excited in the next little while to bring some of this into something cohesive around a community report and go back to all the folks that, it's been years now that we approached about, hey, we want to let you know we're doing this and hopefully get your support and just put the word out that we're doing stuff and we hope to do more, because sometimes you get into doing it and, we just don't want to lose that piece as well, to just kind of say, hey, this is happening.
Brilliant.
It's nice to see more of you. Bumping into you every day.
Yeah, it's on campus. We're supervising one of my colleagues in the PhD in health program. Like, every time she mentions she's working with you, I'm like, oh, that's great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ta-da!
And we have Taylor formulating something in the chat. Taylor says, just honored to hold space with you all today. Grateful for sharing your journey, wisdom, and knowledge. Very important work.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
So with that being said, Walaliak, I thank you for joining us and really sharing with us the incredible steps you've taken so far on the journey. And I look forward to hearing more about where the project goes. The SHaG Lab has its own website. It's just that .ca, shaglab.ca, and you can find them on pretty much every form of social media ever under that name. So thank you for joining, and I think we're good to